So this morning we come together and it's the final week of our Jesus Said series. Now when I say it's the final week of our Jesus Said series, in reality we're not really ending, so to speak. We're going to go into another segment, so to speak, of the Jesus Said series. So next week we're going to be starting to look at some of what we would look at and say, that's kind of a tough saying of Jesus. And so just instead of a general thing, we're going to be doing a series called Tough as Nails. And it's going to be looking at the sayings of Jesus that are sometimes difficult to really understand or maybe difficult to accept. Maybe it's something where, I get what Jesus is saying, but it's really hard to accept. And so as we wrap up this series, I want to remind you of kind of where we've been. We went through Matthew 5, looking at the Beatitudes, where Jesus says, Blessed are, or happy are those, and we went through all of those Beatitudes together. And we said, this isn't really how the world would necessarily define happiness, but Jesus knows what true happiness is, and he doesn't want to leave us in the dark about that. And so we went through that together. And then when I was gone, Curtis walked through what it looks like, as Jesus said, you know what, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. What's that look like? And so walked through that. And then last week, I think it's something, and I told you this last week, that if you can really grasp this concept, it will be revolutionizing for you. And so last week we looked at, you have the opportunity to be depositing, so to speak, your time, your energy, your money, your talents, all of who you are depositing somewhere. You are either making earthly deposits or you are making heavenly deposits. And so I encourage you, as you entered this last week, to really start to evaluate, where am I making my deposits? And if you can really get that and say, you know what, I'm going to start using my talents for heavenly things instead of just earthly things. And I'm going to start using my time. And I told you last week, and this is really important to get, it doesn't mean you have to quit your job in order to be making heavenly deposits. It just means that as you go through every day, you are going through that day with this in mind. I'm a child of God. I'm going to live like it, I'm going to act like it, I'm going to speak like it, and people are going to know a difference. You're making a heavenly deposit. Today's message is really a pretty simple one, and yet as adults we make it extraordinarily complicated. So here's what I need to start off the gathering this morning. I need a volunteer, preferably either a young person or a teenager, because I need your intelligence. Okay, come on up, Sarah. All right. I'm going to borrow Sarah's intelligence for a while. All right. You get to sit right here beside me. How's that work? Does that work for you? All right. I'm going to have you analyze a lot of what we're talking about today. Can you do that? Yeah. All right. So when I asked for intelligence, you should have seen it. It was not like I said, as soon as I need your intelligence, she's like, kind of nudged her boyfriend. That's me. It's not really what happened, but that'll work, right? Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so we're going to look at some verses together, and I just need you to tell me what they mean. All right, so here we go. All right, so we're going to read a verse here. It says, "Therefore I, Jesus, tell you, do not worry about your life." Now, what do you think that means?
Don't worry about the ups and downs.
There you go. Don't worry. You nailed that one right on. All right, so it says, don't worry about your life, what you will eat. Now, when it says don't worry about what you will eat, what do you think that means?
Don't watch your weight.
Don't watch your weight. Man, how many of you like that? Give me a high five. I would have never come to that conclusion. I needed your intelligence today. Don't worry about what you eat. That means you can weigh whatever you want and go for it. Man, I picked the right person. You are awesome. All right, so don't worry about what you'll eat or about what you'll drink, about your body, what you're going to wear. Is not life more important than food and the body more important than clothes? All right, so hold on a second. So he uses the word therefore. Now, I had a professor in college, and he always said, Dave, anytime you see therefore, you always ask, what's the therefore? Therefore. That's a good question. So why is the therefore there? All right, so let's just go back and we'll look for a second as what was taught in chapter 6. Verses 1 through 4 It's all about doing your acts of righteousness, not for public display, but just doing them secretly. So I call it silent service because secret service sounded a little bit too political. All right, so verses 5 through 15, it's all about sincere prayer. Verses 16 through 18, it says when you fast, don't make yourself look all like, oh man, I haven't eaten in days or anything like that. No, it says actually put oil on your head and make it so that people don't be like, okay, oh, wow, that person's fasting. They're so religious. No, so we're doing secret fasting. Verses 19 through 24, which is right before this, we just read verse 25, was what we talked about last week, and that's making heavenly deposits. And so I wanted all S's, and so I put secure deposits, okay? Because if you put them in heaven, they're secure. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. All right, so that's all the therefores. Why? That's what was before. Now we read, so, all right, no one can serve two masters. This is verse 24, right before what we read. No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. And then we read, all right, so because you can't serve God and money, I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you are going to wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? All right, I'm about done with you, but hold on a second. Here's the main point. Your devotion is going to be somewhere. When we read, you can't serve God and money, the main point of that is you are going to serve something, right? Everybody say this. Say, I will serve. And then you get to fill in that blank. You're serving something. Some of us spend a lot of time serving our family because we think that's the wise thing to do. And it's good to take care of your family. But if that is what your entire life is wrapped around, you are probably cutting God out of the equation of that family. Some of us spend our entire time serving our job, serving money, serving, and you just fill in the blank, but you're right. I will serve something. And Jesus knows our weaknesses and tells us where to place our focus. He says, you can't serve God and money. And he says, listen, I want you to serve me. So, back to this verse. Because you can't serve God and money, I tell you. Now, if Jesus tells us something, if I was Jesus, just pretend for a second. Now, you got to use a tremendous imagination to in any way think that anything about Jesus with me. But if I was Jesus and I walked up to you and you knew that I was Jesus, would you want to hear what I said?
Yeah.
You would? Yeah. How about you guys? If you knew that I was Jesus and I walked up to you and I said something, would you want to hear what I said? Yeah. I would. Like, if I knew that Jesus was going to walk up to me and he's going to say, Dave, I got something to tell you. Or he's going to say, Sarah, I got something to tell you. It's like, woo, I want to hear. I want to hear. And so, Jesus is telling us something. He says, I'm going to tell you something. And he says, do not worry about your life. Now, Sarah has already said, when it says don't worry about your life, it means don't worry about your life. You're like, you nailed that. Now, here's the thing. You can go ahead and sit down. Thank you for your help. Everybody give Sarah a big round of applause. She was awesome. She not only cheers for the Northwestern Huskies, she provides her intelligence for you all to share. All right? So, thank you very much. It's simple. We as adults like to read this, not don't worry about your life. We say don't worry about your life, but like you don't know my life. And if you knew my life, then you would actually think that it was okay to worry. Because I think we have all come to those points where we like, God knows that I'm going to worry about this. Like, he just knows that's who I am. That's how I'm designed. I'm going to worry. God, don't tell me not to worry. Like, he doesn't really understand what he was saying whenever he said don't worry. Now, how many of you think that Jesus didn't really understand what he was saying whenever he said, do not worry about your life? How many of you are bold enough to say, like, I just don't think Jesus knew? Oh, come on. There's not even one sarcastic one in here this morning? Not when it comes to Jesus, man. I ain't telling him. Right, I get that. I get that. So he's right. He says, don't worry about your life. And if it was just a period, I think a lot of us would be like, oh, okay, whatever. But Jesus knows, like, this is something I probably need to delve into a little deeper. He knows the core of who we are, right? He knows that some of us deal with anxiety to a greater extent than others. He knows that, like, just to say don't worry, there's something intellectually that doesn't quite fit. I had a chance to meet with Jim Franks this week, and I don't remember, I think it was Wednesday that we got a chance to get together. It was just, I really enjoy our conversations, and he's an intellectual guy, and so he does a lot of reading, and he was talking about this book that he's reading about how, like, there's certain brain pathways. There's a different word that you used. Neuropathways. Not brain pathways, neuropathways. I told you he was intellectual. And it's just about how some of those, like, aren't connected at all times. And we were talking about how in Christ we're new creatures, and about how, you know, the more that science kind of learns and understands, the more it connects with what we're told in the Bible. And so whenever he says, don't worry about your life, I really believe that he knows he's going to have to connect something for us in order for us to really be able to go through life and not have to worry. I sell things on Craigslist every once in a while, and over the course of the last couple of weeks, I sold a certain thing on Craigslist, and an individual paid me via PayPal, but they messed up one letter in my email address. Anybody ever have that happen? One person, all right. So my email address that I use is shortandbald4848@gmail.com. I don't know where I came up with the short and bald thing, but nevertheless, that's my email address. I just give you guys Dave at mynewhope.tv. It sounds a whole lot better than shortandbald4848, right? So she put in shortbald4848@gmail.com. I ain't going to get no money if she puts in short bald. She needs to put short and bald. She needs the right? So she missed the N. I'm short and bald. Okay, so I she sent me a text message. She said, I sent you the money. I'm like, I didn't get it. What email address did you use? And she's like, the bald short one. And so I asked her to send me a copy, and sure enough, it said short bald 4848. So I could see that she intended to send me the money. And so she was all worked up. She hadn't used PayPal a whole lot, and I'm like, it's not a big deal. And she's like, you don't understand. I can't afford to lose this money. I'm like, no, you don't understand. If that money never gets back to you, I'm not going to charge you anyway. And she's like, that's not fair to you. I'm like, I long ago came to a point where I realized money ain't mine anyway. So if you don't get it back, it's not fair to me to charge you again. And she's like, that's just weird. And I'm like, something has been connected. And I'm not sitting up here to, like, pat myself on it. Nothing like that. No. I'm just simply saying, like, God has to connect the dots for us. And when he connects the dots, it is very freeing. Where you come to a point intellectually and you come to a point spiritually where you understand, you know what? Because Jesus says, don't worry, I got this, we can trust. We don't need to worry. He's got this. And so when I read, don't worry about your life, you know what I understand? I understand don't worry about your life. You guys thought I was going to say something really smart. No. Don't worry about your life. And so then he goes on. All right, so we understand don't worry about your life, but also do not worry about what you will eat. Now, whenever we read don't worry about what you will eat, it means you don't have to worry about where your next meal comes from. You don't have to worry about thinking, okay, I don't know if I have enough. Now here's how this gets lived out. We're going to see this in just a moment. John Calvin, and I don't quote him often, but he says something pretty cool here in just a moment we'll look at. But whenever we think about this, I want us to think of it this way. When it says don't worry about what you will eat, God has an abundance of resources. And sometimes we are so stuck on using our resources that whenever it comes time to where we genuinely don't have, we are scared, afraid, or too proud to use God's resources. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say that you're going through a time in life where you've lost your job, you're genuinely struggling, and quite frankly, if God doesn't come through, you aren't going to have a next meal. And some of you have probably been there. Let's say you get to that point in life. Here's what a lot of us do. We are so proud that we are afraid to ask for any assistance. We are afraid to go to a trusted friend and say, man, you know that I lost my job. I don't know where my next meal is going to come from. When we talk about being a church family, is that just a nice term that we throw around so that we can say, oh, I think that's what we're supposed to say? When I think of a church family, I think of it this way, and we read in Acts chapter number 2 when it talks about they shared what they had, and nobody considered what he had his own. When I think of a church family, I think of things that way. I think of things, and you say, well, that sounds like socialism. Well, it sounds like you've been listening to too much politics, but if that's the first thing that went through your mind, if socialism didn't go through your mind whenever I said that, then congratulations. But I don't think of it as that. I think of it as love. I really believe, I'm just going to pick Ron. I really believe that if Ron knew that I was struggling big time and I really believe that Ron, my brother, would help me out. I really believe, as I look across here, I really believe as I look to the back, that if Malcolm knew that I was struggling, that he'd be willing to help me out. I believe that as I look to the back and I see Joe, that, you know what? If he knew I was struggling, he'd be willing to help me out. I believe that and here's what I believe, and it's not about me. I believe that if Ron knew that Curtis was struggling, that Ron would say, you know what, he's part of my family. I'm going to help him out. Whenever we read, don't worry about what you'll eat, I believe that God's resources are more than just dropping something out of the sky. His ability to provide for us is oftentimes done by those who are around us. You know, I think back through like the Old Testament, and let's just use the prophet Elijah for a moment. You know, there were times that God providentially, divinely chose to feed the prophet Elijah with a raven. Now, quite frankly, being a Steelers fan, I've never known anything good to come from ravens. And that's something you Browns fans can agree with. But God used a raven to feed Elijah. But you know what he also did? He used the widow of Zarephath to feed Elijah. So there were times when God would use people. There were times that God providentially did it on his own. When Adam and Eve sinned against God in the garden, they had no way to restore a relationship with God, and you see God come to them, it puts me forward to don't worry about your life. It puts me forward to don't worry about what you're going to eat. Don't worry about what you're going to drink. Don't worry about what you're going to wear. It puts me forward to that because I see that God has an abundance of resources. Sometimes we're too proud to allow those resources to be used on us. And so, don't worry about what you will eat. What's it mean? It means don't worry about what you will eat. Don't worry about what you will drink. Now, since I've been giving you all kinds of intellectual statements, what do you think this one means? Don't worry about what you will. You guys nailed it. You're getting close to being as smart as Sarah. Not quite. You'll get there, maybe. Number one, Sarah's smart because she's a teenager, and teenagers know what? Everything. Holy cow. That was, listen, I've been preaching here for 1 year and 3 months now. That was the fastest answer I've received in the 1 year and 3 months that I have been preaching. Teenagers know everything. So we adults, we've got to catch up. When it says, don't worry about what you will drink, it means don't worry about what you will drink. That's a good point. That means they're actually listening. How many of you are happy to know the teenagers are listening? Me too. All right, now, this one's much more complicated. This one says, don't worry about your body. What do you think that means? Don't worry about your body. See, hold on a second. Teenagers know. Don't worry about your wait. You guys are so slow whenever I give you these ones. It means don't worry about your body. Now, why do you think that Jesus has had to say, don't worry about your life, and then he has to elaborate like what you will eat or what you will drink? And then why do you think he has to say, don't worry about your body? Then he has to go, what you will wear. And then he has to say, isn't your life more important than food? Now, he has already said, don't worry about your life. And then he says, your life is more important than food. So you don't have to worry about your life, and you don't have to worry about food. And then he goes on to say, the body is more important than clothes. And he's already told us we don't have to worry about our body. So now, it's almost like he's saying, all right, so if I just leave this generic, you're going to think, okay, there's like exception clauses to this. If I just tell you don't worry, then you'll be like, well, he didn't understand that I have to figure out where I'm going to get food. And he doesn't understand that I have to figure out what I'm going to wear. He doesn't understand. No, he's like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and elaborate a little bit on this. So don't worry, and I'll give you a lot of things not to worry about. And then he gives us an illustration. How many of you like illustrations? All right, cool. Jesus gives us one. He says, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? How many of you think you're more valuable than a bird? Okay. I think you're more valuable than a bird as well. Much more valuable than a bird. So, it says, listen, your heavenly Father feeds the birds. Don't you think he can take care of you? You're much more valuable. So here's the quote from John Calvin. When we're reading this, it doesn't mean that the birds are idle or lazy. It simply means that even if every kind of assistance were to fail, God's providence alone would be enough for us, since it abundantly supplies the animals with all that they need. Because I think this is important. Some people will read a verse like, don't worry about what you'll eat, don't worry about what you'll drink, and you'll be like, and they'll be like, I can be lazy? God's going to take care of me. Now, I believe that whenever it says he takes care of the birds, now, other than baby birds who are fed by what? Mama birds. How do the birds get their food? Do they have to leave their nest to get their food? Yes. So the food is provided, right? But it's not dropped into their mouths unless you're talking about the mama feeding the baby birds. So I want you to process this with me. There have been times throughout the course of biblical history where God did providentially provide for whether the Israelites, Elijah, Elisha, you can Adam and Eve, you can go through and you can find a lot of examples where because other resources were not available, God providentially provided. How did he do that for the Israelites? He provided them manna in the desert, right? He provided them with water that at one specific time came out of a rock. Okay, so when all other resources are gone, God can providentially provide. You say, what's the point here? The point is this. Should you work? The answer to that is yes. Should you work to provide for your family? The answer to that is yes. Now, here's what's really cool. God has a job out there for you. And he allows you the opportunity to be able to use your talents, your skills, your intelligence, the health that you have to be able to provide. He has put it out there. Now, the very next verse, which is, I think, really cool that they're back to back. Well, the next one. Sorry about that. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? I've been asking you questions all day. Jesus asked this one. All right, so how many of you, this is Jesus' question, not mine. How many of you by worrying can add an hour to to your life? Okay, cool. 0. All right, so now God provides for the birds. Check this one out. Why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. Now, there's a difference between birds and flowers, right? Birds, God provides the food, but they go out and they get it, right? So he's taking care of them, but they have to use their energy. They have to use their abilities to go out and get it. However, for those who cannot provide for themselves, God says, I got you too. So I see a difference between birds and lilies of the field. The lilies of the field can do nothing on their own, right? They can't just like pull out the roots, walk a little bit, get a little bit of sunshine here. It's like, oh man, I'm in the shade. Okay, pull up. I'm in the sun. Yay. Okay, 3 hours of sun. I'm going back to the shade. The lilies can't do that. And you say, what's the point? Well, I believe that, number one, God knows you right where you are. If you are in a situation where you cannot provide for yourself, God has an abundance of resources to be able to provide for you. And that happens to people sometimes. There are very healthy people who, due to an accident, are immediately paralyzed, right? And they're not able to go out, and they're not able to work, they're not able to provide for themselves. And God says, you know what, I got you. So there are two different things going on here, but in all situations, God says, I got this. I really do. I got this. I got your back on this one. I'm not at a loss for resources. How does that make you feel? I know that there are some still, even now, but my situation is different. Everyone's situation is different. I get that. I get that. Core value for today is integrity, which means that we'll tell the truth. That's the first part of that. It continues on. But part of telling the truth is telling it like it is. And the truth of the matter is this. When we worry, I want you to get this. When we worry, we make ourselves or believe ourselves to be more powerful than God. Process that for a moment. When we worry, which means that we want to solve the situation on our own, which means that we are trying to figure it out whenever God says, I've got this. When we worry, we place ourselves from being a servant of God to believing we are above him. And quite frankly, as we saw just a verse ago, you can't change anything by worrying. Now, I could give you statistics which would tell you that 80% of things that people worry about never come to pass. That ain't going to do anything for you. I could give you statistics that would say out of those 20% that do come to pass, 17% of those things you could do nothing about anyway. So you worry about something, and 80% of the time it doesn't come to pass. And research would say those 20% that do come to pass, about 17% of those things you couldn't have done anything about anyway. So you're looking at 97% of the things that you worry about are completely out of your control or never happen. There was a joke I read online this week. It went something like this. A man's wife was worrying about their house being broken into. And for 10 years, every night, she worried about this, talked to her husband about it. So one night they hear a noise in the downstairs. The husband gets up, goes down to the downstairs, and sure enough, there's a burglar there. And he says, sir, do you mind coming upstairs? My wife's been waiting to meet you. Now, again, that's a joke. But it kind of shows a little bit of the intellectual lack of reasoning we have when we worry, right? Because we understand, and I believe that most of us intellectually believe when Jesus says you can't add an hour to your life. Intellectually, I think we believe that. But we don't put it all the way down to where we are. But what about the health of my kids? What if something happens to them? What about whenever they go out and they're by themselves? What if something... Can you change those circumstances? Largely no. Largely no. But I don't want it to be about just intellectually understanding, oh, okay, I can't change those things. I want you to understand more about who God is so that you have confidence in him rather than all these situations. Now, does that make sense? Only when you really, truly trust God for every detail of your life are you going to not worry. I could sit here and talk about statistics all day long. I'm going to do no good. I believe that. But what about God? What have you seen him do? Have you seen him walk through every detail of your life? In those times of pain, have you felt his soft touch of comfort? In those times of loss, have you felt a peace that you didn't quite understand? In those times of hurt, has God brought someone along to give you an encouraging word? God has an abundance of resources. And when all of them are exhausted, he will providentially intervene. But you guys know this about me, and you know this about what I've been teaching over the course of the last long time. Many times God uses people to accomplish his work. He does. On this earth, many, many times God uses people to do the work that he has. So let me ask you this. To who have you been a blessing this last week? To whom have you offered an encouraging word so that maybe someone hasn't had to worry the way that they once were? Have you maybe known that someone was in need and offered to help out? You say, but God, he's supposed to take care of that. Well, maybe he's taking care of that through you. You ever heard of that song? I don't remember the exact lyrics to it, but it's basically someone crying out, God, why don't you do something? And kind of the answer to that is, I did. I created you. I thought Tony Greer's testimony last week was so powerful as he was baptized. He said, I used to be really mad at God for all the things that happened in this world, the evil that there was. And he said, I came to the conclusion the reason those things happened is because there were way too many people like me that rebelled against God. I'm like, man, I don't think I've ever said it that well. But maybe God just has you to be a voice of compassion. Someone who shows genuine love so that people don't have to worry. All right, so just moving on here. He says, if that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which they can't take care of themselves, and yet he says, I've made them look better than even Solomon in all his glory. If he takes care of them that way, and they're here today, tomorrow they're thrown in the fire, won't he much more clothe you? O you of little faith. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Don't worry about those things. The pagans, oh man, this is where it really it's like, oh man, you just stuck the knife in right there. Oh man, you got me. I was okay with you telling me not to worry, Jesus, but the moment you said that's what the pagans do, that's what people who want nothing to do with God do, they all worry. The moment you tell me that I'm like them, it's like, oh, you're right. How many of you have coworkers who want nothing to do with God and yet they worry? All right, quite a few of you. Friends, neighbors, relatives want nothing to do with God, yet they worry. Yeah. All right, so you know that there are people who worry. Shouldn't Christians be different? Shouldn't there be something different about us? We say we believe in God, right? We say we believe that he loves us so much that he sent his one and only Son to this earth to buy us back from the marketplace of sin, right? That's what we say. He loves us that much that he was willing to send his only Son to accomplish our salvation so that we could have a relationship with him, a restored, renewed relationship, because sin separates us from God. We say all of those things about God, and yet once we become his followers, we're like, okay, now I'll take care of the rest, Jesus. Thanks for doing that. I'm guessing you want to do nothing else for me. Some of you have gone through the process of adoption, right? the process of adoption is a pretty extensive, labor-intensive, usually financially intensive process. Now, for someone to go through the process of adoption, and then for the child to just be like, all right, thanks, got it from here on. No, it's like, I'm guessing you want to do nothing for me other than adopt me. I guess that's it. That's not the way it works, is it? Those of you that have adopted, that's not the way that works. Like, that's like the beginning. And then they're in your family, and you get to show them an abundance of love and care and compassion that they have maybe never known before in their life. So when Jesus adopts us into his family, do you think that he adopts us into his family and he just says, guessing you got it from here? No. He adopts us in, and we see his love in doing that. Don't you think he's going to continue to show us that abundance of love, care, compassion? Absolutely. Because he's what? He's our Father. And I realize that some of you, when you think of an earthly father, you have maybe not had a good, positive example. I understand that. But I want you to know that your heavenly Father, he loves you deeply. And his love is pure and honest and good. And he says, don't worry, I got you. I got this. Your heavenly Father, he knows your needs. He's got you in all of these things. I didn't read this. Oh, man. I messed up. Got it back. I didn't read this one part. I want to make sure you get this. It says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. It sounds a lot like last week's message. It sounds a whole lot like it. The pagans run after all the things, and your heavenly Father knows you need them, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Earthly deposits, heavenly deposits, right? That's last week's message. Ties perfectly into this week's message. Therefore, don't worry. I'm not like reading a different verse. This is the next verse. You're like, but that's been said like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times already today. I know Jesus knows we're thick-skulled. He knows I am. You're not, I know. You're not thick-skulled. I am. He wrote this for me. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So last week we asked, where are your deposits? This week I want to ask you this. Where's your trust? Do you got this? Or does he have this? It's a genuine question. One that, quite frankly, will make a huge difference in this coming week for you. One that, quite frankly, will save you a lot of heartache, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of anxiety-filled days. Because when you know him and you trust him, it means you take things out of your hand and put them in his. Does that make sense? He's a whole lot more powerful than you. He's got a whole lot more resources than you. So where's your trust? Father,